Welcome, friends, to the Clergy Renewal Program's 2023 information webinar. Thank you for taking time to listen in and learn about the programs. Our video begins with a few words from our program director at the Lilly Endowment, Reverend Brian Williams.
The stories that we hear are amazing. When pastors have time to take care of themselves, it's just amazing what happens, how congregations change, how communities begin to change because the congregation starts to flourish in ways that they maybe never thought they would. And so I just want to, again, finally say thank you once more for your ministries and for all of what you do for the neighborhoods, the communities, the cities that you serve. We are just profoundly grateful for your work. Thanks.
Thank you, Brian. Yeah, and certainly we here at Christian Theological Seminary, where among other things we train pastors and future pastors, that sort of thing is on our mind as well, and that makes us doubly grateful that we are able to partner with Lilly Endowment to offer these programs to pastors and congregations. I'm going to take a few minutes now and just say a little bit about what the programs are, what their purpose is, and again, whether you've been aware of these programs for a while. As Brian said, they've actually been happening now for over 2 decades. You hear me saying programs, by the way, because there are actually two different programs that we're talking about. One is for Indiana congregations specifically. The other is for congregations in the other 49 states, as well as Puerto Rico. So it's the Indiana program and the national program. If your congregation happens to be located in Indiana, you'll apply to the Indiana program. Otherwise, you would apply to the national programs. What the programs are, in a nutshell, is an opportunity for us to offer grants to congregations of up to $60,000. And of that $60,000, $20,000 can be used by the congregation for the following purpose: for the pastor to have an opportunity to step away from the congregation on what we call a renewal leave. And I'll talk in just a second about why we use that language. Some congregations talk about it in terms of a sabbatical. We tend to think about it in terms of, yes, Sabbath rest might be a part of it, but sometimes people hear sabbatical and especially if they're thinking in sort of an academic frame, they might think, oh, I need to go away and produce something. I need to come back, with a book in hand or a new skill set and so on. You might choose to do that. But our focus rather is on a renewed and refreshed pastor, whatever the activities are that will help get the pastor to that place. And I'll say more about that in a minute. As I said, the total grants are up to $60,000, and $20,000 of that money can be used specifically by the congregation. Up to $20,000 can be used by the congregation to cover costs while the pastor is away. So, for instance, in many congregations, if the pastor is going to go on renewal leave, the congregation would need to pay for, say, a supply preacher or someone to help cover functions while the pastor is away. We encourage that. In our ideal circumstances, the pastor pursuing this kind of opportunity would not be a direct cost to the congregations. So what can be done with that money? What constitutes a renewal leave? Well, the answer to that question really is as diverse and as varied as pastors themselves and congregations themselves. In other words, we don't tell you exactly what it is you might want to be doing on a leave. Rather, you tell us. That really is the substance of the application. The congregation, the pastor, put together a proposal saying, okay, when it comes to what will be renewing and refreshing for this pastor, and as far as what the congregation needs from the programs in order to make this happen, you tell us the activities, you tell us the time frame. I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. And you can broadly paint for us a picture of what it is that is going to be renewing for the pastor and for the congregation. So we're receiving a couple of messages saying that the chat is disabled, so we'll work on that here in a minute. But go ahead and sit on your questions, and I'll say a little bit more in the meantime about some frequently asked questions about the programs. You hear me say, the grants are given to congregations. There we go. All right. I knew there'd be a floodgate of questions. Yes, welcome everyone. As I mentioned, the grants are given to congregations rather than individual pastors. That's true for some technical reasons, but it's actually, I'm going to go ahead and use the word, it's also true for spiritual reasons. In other words, we think about these renewal opportunities as a shared enterprise, dare I say a shared adventure, between the pastor and the congregation. And the real goal here is for the pastor and the congregation to be renewed for future shared ministry together. Now, we know that across the beautiful and diverse landscape of American Christianity, what congregations look like, how they're set up, how the pastor relates to the congregation, those different functions, those are diverse. And again, I hope what you're hearing me say in these initial comments is that we want you to tell us what it is that is going to be most revitalizing, refreshing in your congregational context. If I can give one more sort of spiritual excursus on that, the tagline for our programs is "What will make your heart sing?" Now, that's the kind of phrase that you might hear and you might think, oh, is that, it sounds nice, but what does that really mean concretely? The way I would invite you to think about that would be, speaking to pastors now, if you're a pastor and you envision coming into your office, coming into the church, say 3 months from now, some amount of time from now, and you just feel absolutely ready to go, energized, in love with ministry all over again, what would you have been doing in those previous 3 months? You specifically, what would you have been doing in those previous few months that would get you to that place? As Brian mentioned, in the several decades that these programs have been going on, we've seen pastors and congregations have all sorts of answers to that question. So many pastors travel. Some go to Europe or the Holy Land or Africa or Asia, or travel within the US. Some pastors really spend a lot of time focusing in on it's stronger than hobbies, the activities that give them life, whether that's arts, photography, fishing. Something that many pastors choose to do is to spend a lot of time engaging with their families. Believe me, we know that if you're a pastor who has loved ones in your life, chances are they are, whether they have an official title at the congregation or not, they are involved with the ministry too. And so we deeply encourage pastors to use these funds to bring along those for whom strengthening that relationship will be part of what gives life, whether that's a partner, whether that's children, where some pastors choose to engage with longstanding colleagues from seminary. Again, the answer to that question is as diverse as pastors and congregations themselves as well. But I hope what you're hearing is a kind of broad canvas on which you can be thinking, what are the activities that as a pastor will bring you to a deeper sense of refreshment, re-engagement with ministry? And then for congregations, we want you to think not only about the practical needs of what you might need to use this money for in order to cover costs while the pastor is away, but does the congregation have opportunities to do parallel kinds of activities? In other words, in many of the grant applications that we receive and in many that we fund, we hear congregations saying, we want to take this time to do structured Bible study, or we want to take this time in order to have some events that will allow us to, as a congregation, to reflect upon our story and the way God has been faithful to us over the years and what God might be calling us to do in the future. If you're, as a congregation, you can envision activities like that, and if you'd like to draw upon grant funds to help support that, then that is a welcome use of the money as well. When we think about the mechanics of a renewal leave, we start first with the question, for how long does the pastor need to step away in order to really have a deep sense of disengagement from the parish for the purpose of being re-engaged in the future? In other words, we all know and can imagine that if it's a situation where the pastor is not really able to step away, then that's not going to be good either for the pastor's experience or for the congregation's benefit for when the pastor comes back. So we asked first the question, how long does the pastor need to be away in order to have that deep sense of temporary disengagement from the congregation in order to attend to these other things? Historically, we have found that the place to begin is to envision something like a 3-month renewal leave. In other words, we found over and over again that if the pastor can envision being away for about 3 months at a minimum, that achieves certain kinds of benefits. That said, we are also aware that for some congregations, an uninterrupted 3 months away is not going to be feasible. For that reason, we do allow you to propose a structure of a leave in which that 3 months, we would ideally like it to still add up to 3 months across the course of 24 months. But if you want to break up that time, say a month here, a month and a half at a later point, we do allow for that. And you're welcome to propose that structure in your application. So again, what I want to emphasize there is across the space of 24 total months, we would like you to think about a leave that totals a minimum of 3 months, whether that is the 3 months taken in uninterrupted fashion, start to finish, or whether that is 3 months broken up into shorter amounts of time. Of course, if you would benefit from taking longer than 3 months, and if the congregation is supportive, then that is welcome as well. We regularly fund renewal leaves that are 4 months, 5 months, 6 months. Again, that really is a contextual question for the pastor and the congregation. As I mentioned before, in terms of the sort of activities that pastors pursue, again, many pastors travel, but that is not a requirement. For some pastors, staying closer to home is more desirable. We realize that's especially true if it's a situation where the pastor is bivocational or multivocational. Let me say first that we warmly welcome pastors that are multivocational to apply. If it is a situation where your other responsibilities means that for the most part, your renewal leave will keep you closer to home, please know that that's okay. The only thing that you'll want to be especially attentive to at that point is that you are able to go ahead and have that separation from the congregation. Sometimes there are particular challenges with that if you're still sort of in the geographic vicinity of your congregation, but we have found that pastors and congregations are able to work that out and to be very successful with that. In terms of who is eligible to apply, it is any ordained pastor who is on the or a congregation rather is welcome to apply on behalf of any ordained pastor on its rolls. That could be a senior pastor, that could be a solo pastor, that could be an associate pastor. If you ask the question, well, what do you mean by ordained? Then that's an instance where we work with you to determine what does ordination look like within your particular tradition. For some traditions, it's very clear what ordination looks like, and there's a denominational infrastructure involved. If you're in a Christian tradition where some of those terms are slightly less defined, then I encourage you to contact us and talk with us, and we would work with you to determine whether the pastor status meets the requirement. The program is focused on congregations and their pastors. So for those who are ordained but working in other kinds of settings, say chaplaincy settings, that sort of thing, that is a situation where there is not eligibility for these programs. But if you are a congregation wanting to apply on behalf of a pastor who is serving pastoral functions within the congregation, then these programs are for you. There will be more to say about the philosophy of the programs. I want to take a few moments and look over some of the questions that you all are very helpfully putting in the chat. While I do so, I'm going to turn things over to Karen. You may be wondering, okay, I'm interested in applying. How do I do it? And Karen is going to take you through some of the mechanics of applying. And afterwards, we'll get back to some of the questions you're putting in the chat.
Thanks, Rob. Welcome, everyone. I'm glad to be here and offer just hopefully some insight and some things to help you and your congregation put forward your best foot with submitting a proposal. I'm going to share my screen here, and we'll start here. Give me 1 second. So just an FYI, we call this the 2024 program year, but the program year is always the current year that we're in. And that program year receives proposals that are for the following year. So if you're submitting a proposal in 2024, that proposal will support a leave that can begin in 2025 and could extend into 2026 based on how you have planned your leave. Something I like to just point out, we get this question a lot, where do I find the information I need? So when you're, there's two things you really want to look for. You want to look for the request for proposals document. As Rob mentioned earlier, we have two programs. There is an Indiana program, and that will look like that bottom left image that you see on this slide. Then there's a national program, and that will look like the slide on the top. Those, and then there's fillable form pages. So while the form pages are included within the pages of the RFP, we also include them separately so that if you want to complete those digitally and save them to your computer, you can do that. So you'll find those. There's two ways to get there. If you visit the Christian Theological Seminary's website, that's cts.edu, you'll find a link that says renewal. And then if you hover over renewal, you get a drop-down menu and you'll see Clergy Renewal. And then you'll also see resources. And when you get to the resources page, you scroll just a little bit, you'll find grant seeker resources. That's where these requests for proposals are. That is where the fillable pages are. There's also a brand new video series that we've recently added to the website that includes interviews with congregational representatives and pastors who previously benefited from a grant, sharing wisdom, sharing their experience, offering just some helpful words of knowledge and wisdom for future grant seekers. Alternately, you can put into your browser lilyclergyrenewal.org. It's a redirect URL, and then look for the grant seekers link. Both of those routes will take you to the same page. So whichever one you follow, just make sure two things. One, that you type out the whole word lilyclergyrenewal.org. Your browser is likely to want to autofill Lily Endowment instead of Lily Clergy Renewal. And while you can get to our website from the endowments, it will take you a little longer. The other thing is, just remember Lily has two L's. It's not like the flower. I like to talk about when and where. These are some helpful dates. Proposals are due Wednesday, March 13th, 2024, 11:59 p.m. That's important if you're going to email your proposal. All email proposals need to come to clergyproposals@cts.edu and be timestamped by 11:59 p.m. For those of you who are outside Eastern time, please, please, please just be aware, especially if you're a little bit of a night owl, if you're trying to get in kind of, those last couple of hours, be mindful of the time. And then you can also mail your proposal if you're kind of, you like that snail mail approach. We are happy however you send it, doesn't make a difference. And you'll see this information here. You'll send it to Dr. Saylor at CTS. This information is all in the request for proposals. We feature the deadline in more than one place, as well as where to send your proposals to. There's some helpful pages I want to point out. These will help you ensure that when you submit your proposal, it has everything that it needs and you haven't missed any critical details. This year's request for proposals, both versions, have been pretty significantly updated, although the vast majority of the information remains unchanged. In consultation with the endowment, Rob and I worked very hard this year to improve the flow, make sure that the language was clear, put things in a logical order, make sure that we were highlighting the information that we wanted people to be aware of. So if you've read through the RFP before, if you are a previous applicant, just make sure that you're looking through the whole document to see what's changed. We've expanded some sections, and again, we've tried to make some things clearer. Page 6 is one place where that's really notable. We talk about what the selection procedures are, just in an effort to for equity, for fairness, and clarity. So you'll want to make sure you take a look at page 6. On pages 7 through 11, regardless of which version you're looking at, you'll find that we step through each part of the proposal, including the form pages, try to provide explanation where it's needed, give some details as they're needed. So that's what you'll find there. And then on page 14, you'll find the guidelines and the checklist. So guidelines are things that remind you, like what font size, what spacing, that type of thing. And then the checklist is just that. We don't need you to send us the checklist. It's there for your convenience so that you can ensure that when you click send or you put that in an envelope, that everything that's supposed to be with that proposal is included. So what is a complete proposal? A complete proposal includes different kinds of narratives. There's a proposal narrative that's parts A through C if you're in the national program. It could be parts A through D if you're in Indiana, if you're a previous recipient. There's a fourth section. And then there's budget narratives. There's a budget narrative for both the pastor's budget and for the congregation's budget. There's form pages. The form pages, as I said, are included in the RFP, but we also provide a separate link to a fillable version of them. And again, in Indiana, there are up to 7 form pages for anyone who's a previous recipient. If you're a pastor who's previously benefited, there's a 7th form that needs to be completed. And then there's 6 forms for the national program. There are documents that we ask for. There are federal tax exempt documents. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. There's the pastor's letter of standing, and then a 1-page summary of the church's operating budget. If you are a larger church and maybe you have a big balance sheet and please by all means, feel free. As a matter of fact, we ask you to condense that to a single page. That means that if you want to use a Word document instead of a spreadsheet and just kind of hit the highlights, that's completely fine for that summary of the church budget. And then there's an optional 5-minute video We give instruction about what that video might contain and what it might address. We also include instructions on how to include a video if you want to. Again, it's a 5-minute video. So if the video itself is longer than 5 minutes, we ask you to tell us where do we start watching so that we watch those 5 minutes that you feel are most important. But it is optional and it will not negatively impact the proposal if you choose not to include one. Back to that documentation, I mentioned the federal tax exempt status. We have to collect from you, as part of the proposal, evidence that your church is a 501c3 organization according to the IRS code. So there are 3 ways that happens. A letter of determination, whether that was issued directly to your congregation, a group exemption ruling. So many of our friends who are part of denominations, they are covered by their denomination's group exemption. And then, some churches don't have either of those, which is completely fine. We ask that you send us an attorney's letter. Details about what that attorney's letter should include is in the RFP. The letter of standing, again, for our friends who are part of a denomination, we ask for a letter from your judicatory. Please keep in mind that your bishops and other judicatory officials can be busy. And if you wait till 3 days before you have to submit your proposal, you may not have your letter in time. So please be kind to yourself and to them, and ask well in advance of that deadline for that letter of standing. If you are part of a non-denominational fellowship of churches, then we ask for a letter of standing from the fellowship through whom your ordination has been provided. Or if your church is fully independent and of denominational or fellowship oversight, then what we'll ask for is a letter from your church's governing or leadership body. We prefer that it's signed by the full body, but at least by the leadership, who will indicate that clergy that you serve in ways that are commensurate with your ordained colleagues. And then again, that 1-page operating budget summary. Of course, you can always reach out to us if you come up with a question that you don't find an answer for in the RFP or any of the other resources that are in that grant seekers section of our website. You feel free to send us an email. That clergyrenewal@cts.edu email comes directly to my desk, and feel free to ask a question. I'm happy to provide guidance. If it's something that I can't answer, Dr. Saylor is always available. If you are someone who prefers to call, please leave a detailed message about what it is that your question is. And then if you can leave an email in, if you can leave your email in your voice message, that's also helpful. Please understand that we do have some high volume times of the year. And so sometimes response times are quicker than others. So we appreciate your patience. And that is everything that I've got.
Thank you so much, Karen. In addition to all the very helpful information that Karen shared, I just want to underline something that she said that I think goes for all of us, which is, if you have a question when it comes to the mechanics of how to apply something with the request for proposals, language that's unclear, don't hesitate to reach out. Something that's very important to us is being able to come alongside congregations that are discerning this possibility at every stage, whether you've applied before, whether this is your first time. And so if in doubt, reach out to us and we will get back to you. I've really enjoyed the questions that are being raised in the chat. I've responded to some of them in type, but I want to highlight a couple of things. A number of folks are asking about reapplication. And I think it might be helpful both for that and then for some other questions to describe a little bit about what happens to an application when it comes to us. We are a competitive program. What that means is we receive many more excellent applications than we're able to fund. What that means is that the various readers that we work with, and we do rotate readers each year. I saw a couple of questions saying, is it the same readers each time? Is it different? We do rotate readers, but the readers that we select have some tough choices to make. And we select readers who know congregations, who have experience in ministry. And when they get together to read these applications and make those tough choices, then I've witnessed they really bring deep care and concern and wisdom to that process. Because that is our process, a number of people have asked, is it possible to get feedback if a congregation's application has been turned down? Can I get specific feedback as to why? Because of the process that I just named, that's one of the reasons why we're not able to offer individualized feedback to every application that is not funded within a given year. I, as director, am not always, I don't always have sort of the ins and outs of how the conversation went among the readers at each time. What I can tell you is that every application is read by multiple readers, and again, they bring a lot of care to it. So, and I can tell you too that oftentimes if an application is not funded, oftentimes that's not at all because there was any sort of deficiency with the application. Again, it's much more a function of the programs being competitive, us receiving many more applications than we're able to fund, and again, the readers making hard choices. So if you have applied before and if your application has been turned down, I would encourage you to think less in terms of, oh, there was something wrong with my application, and more in terms of the recognition that it's actually quite common for congregations to apply multiple times before their application is funded, again, due to the fact of the competitive nature of the programs. A number of folks have asked if I have turned in an application in the past, and if that application wasn't funded, should we completely go back to the drawing board, or is it okay to submit similar activities again? What I would say to that is, in any given year that you apply, you should think through this question. Again, what is it that will make my heart sing? What is it that is going to be most renewing? If it is the case that the answer to that question is very similar to the way you answered it in a previous application, I strongly encourage you to go ahead and submit the application that you think is going to be most effective for getting at your goals for renewal. In other words, the last thing really that you want to do is to try to guess, saying, okay, what do they want to hear as far as my proposed activities? Because the honest answer to that question is, we want to hear, again, what it is that you say will be most effective in getting you to those renewal goals. All of that is a long way of saying, in any given year, propose to us what it is that comes from your passion and your best sense of what renewal is going to look like. And that is the application that has the highest chance of being competitive within the broader pools of applications. Some people are asking if things like congregational size, denomination, that sort of thing plays a role. I can assure you that we fund congregations of all sorts of sizes, from many thousands of people that come on a Sunday to the faithful dozens. So do not let congregational size be a barrier. And again, whether you're a full-time pastor, whether you're bivocational, whether you're senior associates, we warmly welcome applications from all those folks. As far as Karen mentioned the timeline for the leaves, we do ask you to think ahead. You know, the applications will be due this spring. The decisions will be made this summer. Everyone who applies will be notified as to whether their application is going to be funded or not by the end of the summer. And all of that is for leaves that will take place starting in January of the following year. So you do want to think ahead a little bit. When it comes to budgeting, I wanted to mention, a couple of people had questions about that. Because we are asking you to think ahead, and because inflation exists, there are all sorts of variables when it comes to planning travel. You are welcome to construct your budget on the basis of, okay, here's what it would cost if I were to do these activities tomorrow, but then build in a little bit of a cushion, say, around 10% or so that should inflation or something kick in between at the time of the application and when it's actually time to book the travel, you've asked for funds that can cover that. So in other words, when you're making your budget, you're welcome to, we do want to hear from you, okay, how did you arrive at these numbers? But you're welcome to build in a little cushion as well. I'm seeing some questions about tax implications. We're all theologians, we're not tax accountants, and more to the point, when it comes to the potential impact of these grants upon an individual's tax status, that's a question that involves lots and lots of variables. And so we are not in a position to be able to responsibly give any sort of tax advice. Two things I will say. We strongly encourage you at the time of application to consult with a trusted tax advisor, a professional or someone in the congregation who knows the landscape of taxes, particularly clergy taxes, and to determine if this is a situation where there might be any sort of increased tax burden upon the pastor. If that is so, then you are welcome to designate a portion of the funds as offset money. In other words, we don't want a situation where receiving this grant is going to come tax time, produce a nasty surprise for the pastor and their family when it comes to out-of-pocket expenses. So what we recommend is that on the front end, you work with a trusted tax advisor. You determine, given your particular situation, if there is liable to be any increased tax burden. And if the answer is yes, you are welcome to designate a portion of the grant funds to offset that. Speaking of grant funds offsetting, if you're in a situation where you would like to bring along, say, a loved one on the leave, or if you're in a situation where you would like to take the leave, but that's going to have a negative impact upon your income, say if you have another job that generates income that you plan to take time off from, you're also welcome to designate a portion of the funds to offset that lost income. And the philosophy there is that we recognize that pastors and their families, again, are in all sorts of different situations. And within guidelines, whatever this money can be used for in order to make this leave opportunity feasible, we want you to do that. Let's see. I'm just looking through some of the other questions. Somebody asked if I could give a couple of examples of the kinds of things congregations have done that that exemplify possibilities for what the congregational portion might look like. I can think of a couple. I remember one congregation was very interested in questions of hospitality. Like a lot of congregations, they were in a context in which their neighborhood was changing, and they really wanted to think through, what does it mean for us to be a place of hospitality for our neighbors? And so while the pastor was away, the congregation actually brought in an expert on hospitality in the Bible, someone who teaches Bible, I think, at a local divinity school. And they brought that person to the congregation, sponsored a workshop. What I love about that example was while the pastor was away meditating on these things, the congregation was also having an opportunity to sort of pause, breathe, and think more broadly about its vocation to hospitality. So when the pastor and the congregation came back together, they were in a position to really reflect and think well together about that. I've also seen lots of opportunities for congregations to have structured times to reflect on their history. My mother is an avid scrapbooker, so I'm remembering a couple of congregations that sponsored actually scrapbooking events where, storytelling and sort of pulling together various archives and images from the past, again, meant that when the pastor and the congregation came back together, collectively, they had an experience, again, of reflecting on where they'd been, and where God might be calling them to in the future. Those are just two examples, but I think they exemplify that it's not required, I should say, somebody asked this in the chat, it's not required that there be formal congregational activities that are part of this renewal experience. Some congregations say, hey, we really just want this for our pastor. We don't really desire to take on anything else ourselves. That's fine. That said, if this is an opportunity, again, as part of this shared adventure between the pastor and the congregation, for the congregation to think about some of these structured activities, and if the grant funds can support that, then that can strengthen an application. Somebody asked in the chat related to this, well, how involved does the congregation have to be in the application? My answer to that is the place to start is to really fully embody the fact that this application comes from the congregation and not simply the individual pastor. What that means then is that whatever process your particular congregation generally takes whenever a decision is being made on behalf of the congregation, whether that's a capital campaign, whether that's some other significant decision on the part of the congregation, we would like you to think about undergoing a similar process when it comes to making this application. I would certainly warn against a situation where just the pastor, or maybe just the pastor and a few other people, decide to apply in the name of the congregation, and the congregation hasn't even been let in on the possibility of applying. The reason why we see that as harmful, congregations tend to be much more friendly and excited about this possibility when it's presented to them as a possibility and not as a accomplished fact. And then two, even more deeply, not to be a broken record, but we really do want you to think about this as a shared opportunity between the pastor and the congregation. What that means concretely is that there are several questions on the application that ask directly, tell us about how the congregation made the decision to apply. Tell us about the process. I'll say that, some congregations, they're very familiar with the concept of a pastoral renewal leave. They might be sort of right on board from the get-go. More commonly, I would say, is congregations that might be encountering this idea for the first time. There may not be a culture of pastoral renewal leave there. And what that means is it may take a significant amount of time and listening and conversation for the congregation to fully understand, A, what this opportunity is, and then B, what activities, what kind of application is going to best reflect the congregation and the pastor. If it does take time, whether that's months, whether that's a year or more, I would encourage you to think of that as holy time, as beneficial time, because the time that the congregation takes in really having people be able to raise questions, including critical ones, to have those questions talked through, answered, and for everyone to feel a shared sense of ownership of the application, I can definitely attest that that process not only results in a stronger application, but also lays the groundwork, not only for the current pastor, but for future pastors in that congregation to be thinking about these grants. I want to answer a couple of technical questions. When the money for congregations that are awarded the grant funds, those funds are awarded to the congregation. And what we do is, once we've received all of the necessary paperwork, we dispense a check for the requested amount to the congregation. At that point, the congregation decides within its own procedures how best to handle that money. In other words, we don't micromanage from our level how it is, whether it's a situation where the congregation advances the pastor some money or the pastor is reimbursed by the congregation. Those sort of granular financial details we leave to congregations to decide. So when you apply and you're thinking about, okay, what will this look like concretely if it's awarded? What it looks like is, after we've received the necessary paperwork and due diligence, We mail you a check. You follow your best practices and financial procedures for handling the money, and then we receive a fairly straightforward financial accounting at the end of the grant. I'm emphasizing that because I don't want congregations to think of this as, oh, if we take this on, it will mean sort of onboarding a whole strange set of financial procedures, radically different than how we normally do things. No, as much as possible, we want you to incorporate the handling of this money into your normal best practices for doing so. I'm seeing questions again about, can the pastor's family be a part of the leave? Absolutely. And again, our definition of family is capacious. That could be loved ones. We certainly don't encourage that you bring any members of your congregation along on the leave. that would mess with the separation piece. But any others for whom being in life-giving relationship with them is, and having the chance to renew that, is going to be an opportunity for renewal, then absolutely, you can designate grant funds to help support that as well. Somebody's asking me to very helpfully to clarify something that I said earlier. You're hearing me say up to when I say these amounts. The grants are up to $60,000, and up to $20,000 of that can be used by the congregation. When you submit an application and you tell us what activities you would like to do, you'll also give us a budget saying, okay, on the basis of these activities that we're proposing, here's what we think that will cost. You can ask within that for up to a total grant of $60,000. Similarly, when the congregation is coming up with its funds or its budget for its proposed activities, then that can be up to $20,000 within the total grant. What that means is there might be a situation where a congregation says, oh, okay, we only need $15,000 for the activities that we're proposing. In that case, $45,000 would be, up to $45,000 would be available to the pastor. So in other words, the congregational portion is variable within that total grant. It cannot exceed $20,000, but if it is less than $20,000, then any funds other than that can go over into the pastor's side of the budget. I'll say that there really is no advantage. We get this question a lot. There really is no advantage to asking for less money as opposed to the full $60,000. What we really want you to do is to think carefully about that question. Given that for many, this is kind of a once in a lifetime opportunity, what are the activities that will really be maximally effective in getting at these renewal goals? And, we encourage you to identify those activities and to be honest about what they cost. While we certainly want you to be, to tell us how it is that you arrived at those funds, I'll say that there is as big a danger of under budgeting as there is for over budgeting. In other words, a lot of these activities are expensive. Travel is expensive. Feeding families, especially if you're feeding families abroad and so on, that's expensive. We recognize this. We do not want a situation in which, in the name of, pastors tend to be pretty frugal people, but we don't want a situation where in the name of frugality, you under budget what it's going to cost, so that you end up in a situation where you're out there and you don't have all the funds you need. So again, don't be extravagant in the sense of not being able to tell us how you arrived at the numbers, but don't under budget, and don't think that there's somehow an advantage to asking for less money as opposed to more, if asking for more money is actually going to be more effective at getting you towards renewal goals. Some people are asking, and I really love these direct questions. Some people are asking, okay, you're talking about getting the congregation on board. What does that look like? In our experience, that really does look like dialogue. Depending on the size of your congregation, depending on what congregational conversations tend to look like. Again, we anticipate that for many people, this might be the first time hearing about this. And there are good questions that are raised in connection with this. Why does the pastor get the prospect of a renewal leave and I don't? Or how is this actually for ministry and not just a big vacation and so on? I will say that we have a number of resources on our website, all free, that we've solicited from pastors and congregations that have dealt with those questions in their own context. And they have some advice, some tactics as to what that looked like for them. But broadly, I would just encourage you to think of it in terms of open, honest dialogue, in the recognition, again, that it may take congregations a while to fully get the picture, not only of why this might be beneficial, but what that benefit might look like for this specific congregation. I'm seeing a question saying, is it okay to propose a plan that would cost more than $60,000, provided the congregation shares where the monies beyond $60,000 would come from? The answer is yes, and that's common. If you're in a situation where the congregation has some money allocated for this, or the pastor or whatever, even if the total plan costs more than $60,000, if you just tell us, okay, here's what the $60,000 of the grant would go towards, and here's our plan for making up the remainder, then that is common, and that is just fine. I'm seeing a question about what happens when things change. It's hard to imagine a situation, say, within the last 2 or 3 years where a pastor would have travel plans and all of a sudden that would be radically disrupted, right? Say by a global pandemic or no, we recognize things can change dramatically, including from the time when you put the application in to when it's time to actually pursue the renewal activities. What I would say is go ahead and put together the plan that is most exciting and makes the most sense now. If the grant is awarded, and if when it comes closer to time, there need to be major changes, say you were going to travel to a region that's been destabilized, or say there's a health issue within your own family or so on, absolutely, we will work with you to identify an alternate plan. Or if you realize that some aspect of the budget is out of whack due to inflation or something else, please feel free to reach out to us then, and we will work with you around a budget revision. Some people are asking, are there particular no-nos when I'm painting a picture of here are all the different things you can propose, and we really want you to propose whatever it is that's going to be most effective for you. Some people are asking, well, is there anything that's totally off limits? For the most part, again, the message really is freedom, but there are a few things that you want to avoid. One, on the congregation side, is you want to avoid any sort of activity that will start conversations that it's best for the pastor to be there for. So this is not really a time to bring in an expert on, mission strategy or church budgeting or the sort of things that the pastor really would want to be involved with. So if you are thinking about bringing in guest speakers, consultants, and so on, then be mindful that the readers will be looking at the application saying, okay, it's great that they want to get together and think about things, but is what they're thinking about something that the pastor should really be there for? What that means concretely is, I think it's always safe to focus on things like theology, history, Bible, spirituality. If you start focusing on things like specific church governance and so on, that's a little riskier. You also don't want a situation in which the congregation is asking for funds to replace the roof or upgrade the computer system. That is capital expenses for the congregation. That's not really in the spirit of these renewal leaves. As far as the pastor side of things, and maybe this will be sort of what I close with to kind of sum it all up. You want to think in terms of joy rather than obligation. And so, for instance, say you're someone who really loves studying. Say you're a pastor who, let's see, Brian is Methodist. So we'll say you love John Wesley. You just love you some John Wesley. And we've seen applications where the pastor says, look, I love John Wesley. I want to go to England. I want to go to the places where Wesley was so that I can just immerse myself in Wesley's life because that gives me joy. That's one kind of thing. If we read an application that says, okay, the congregation is approving my sabbatical and I guess I need to produce something on it. So I don't know, I'll go study John Wesley and write about John Wesley in ministry. You can just sort of tell that even though it's a similar activity, one comes from a place of joy and the other comes from a place of perceived obligation. Whatever it is, whether it is pursuing educational opportunities. We don't think of these programs, by the way, as an opportunity to fund like a Doctor of Ministry degree or so on. It's fine to take classes, but this is all spelled out in the RFP. But whether it's taking classes, whether it's listening to other preachers, whether it's engaging in different kinds of things that make ministry come alive, again, the exact same activities might be really inspiring to the readers, or they might raise red flags for the readers based on this question. Is the pastor in the congregation pursuing this out of a sense of joy or a sense of obligation? So I would invite you over the next days and weeks to take a look at the materials, both the request for proposals, the application, and also the materials on our website. Begin to imagine and dream your way into this. And if you have specific questions, again, whether this is your first time applying or whether you've thought about this or applied in the past, please reach out to us and know that we are very eager to walk alongside you as you discern this possibility. This webinar recording will be made available to you. It'll be hosted on our website, so don't worry if you didn't catch everything. You'll be able to go back and review it. Again, I just want to thank all of you for taking some time out of your day. And know that we very much look forward to hearing from you if you decide that this is an opportunity that your congregation would like to pursue. I wish you blessings, friends, and thank you so much for all the faithful work that you do in this world. Take care.